Hi, welcome. April 29th. So, looking at Heather's blog piece from yesterday, and then going into today's readings, a thought occurred to me. Not only is the intrigue continue here, almost like Mission Impossible, but I'd have to say the CIA has nothing on David and his family and his followers here. It's great reading. It's almost like a great spy novel at this point. And we got two guys climbing down a well to escape someone who's spying on them, ready to go tell Absalom. And they have to get the message out. And a servant girl of the high priest is gotten them the message, but now they have to throw this guy who's spying on them off the track, and it just goes on and on and on. Ultimately, though, we get beyond that. We come to this point where we have a number of main characters today. Of course, David, who's back on the run, and his son Absalom, who's trying to take over. And then we have Joab, who's this faithful commander of David. And those are some of the main players. And then we have this other curious guy, Shimei, who is actually from the house of Saul. And so all these players kind of enter in today, and it makes for a very interesting story. But the bottom line is, through all of this, Absalom's plot finally is rebellion is finally squelched. But David shows a weakness when it comes to family at this point. Joab, who I'm impressed with all through the narrative, is this soldier, and a soldier, and he makes decisions based on what's right for his men, what's right for his king. He seems to think clearly, and he puts nothing above his duty. And I think in many ways there's some things we can admire about him, whereas David's judgment is very much clouded by family. That's a thought I was thinking about for today, is how gray sometimes our decision-making processes get when our emotions, and especially our ties to family and friends, enter in. And it would be nice to be able to be totally objective all the time, but we aren't. That's not who we are. And so in the end, Joab makes sure that Absalom is taken care of and killed, even though that's not what David wants. David mourns the loss, and we come to this point where now David is going to actually, it's Joab who shakes him out of his stupor and says, you got soldiers and followers who need to hear from you. They're the ones who put their lives at risk for you, and here you're just lamenting the guy who was trying to kill you. What sense does that make? So he kind of shakes David up. David kind of returns and heads back to Jerusalem. And it got me thinking about Jesus' words in Matthew 10:34-36 that says, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be members of his own household." And how true that is in the case of David here, who is this king who's got to worry about maintaining the throne. And so in some respects that maintaining of the throne occurs even as he needs to worry about his own family. Being a faithful follower of God today, that I think in my own life, and an example from this lesson, means that you can't really compartmentalize God and your relationship with Him into one thing. It really must extend over all of life. But what that does is it leads to some very difficult times sometimes. It can be, obviously most of us aren't busy maintaining a throne, but we do run into situations where doing what God commands is very difficult in light of the circumstances. And I think of things like the care of loved ones, especially care of aging parents, and making decisions with siblings, disposing of property when a loved one dies, that we hear over and over in our society today, where the kids actually end up fighting over the property. Raising children in families. Husbands and wives many times will disagree, especially if they don't have the same values, if they don't have the same faith and trust in Jesus. Decisions in the workplace, decisions how to handle our finances, even decisions made within the church, sometimes become very difficult. We'd like it to be like Joab, where it's just a clear-cut yes and no, black and white kind of thing, but many times there are all sorts of other things that cloud our judgment and make it difficult. And I'm afraid that's just the nature of sin in the world, and once again, makes it a struggle. Lots of questions come to my mind, and I didn't have answers for them. Number one, can you be a great leader of people in the world and follow God's commands strictly and correctly? Or will that prevent you, in the world's eyes, from being able to be an effective leader? One of the things that struck me at the end of this account is David kind of comes back to his senses, re-enters Jerusalem, and he starts playing politics again. He basically puts down the people who have been faithful and supportive of him and woos the people from the other side back in, because what he's trying to do is restore the kingdom and unify it once again. So he's got to play the political game to draw them back in, and even to the extent of saying to Shimei, the guy who's cursing him on the way out of Jerusalem, even to granting him mercy as he comes back in. Boy, the things you've got to do sometimes if you're a king in order to maintain control. I also wondered, so does that mean David doesn't really trust in God? Could he not have gone in and said, you know what, God says this and this and this, I must act accordingly and let the chips fall where they may and trust in God to lead? It seems like he's kind of trying to take control of the situation to maintain the kingdom, doing what he thinks is needed, but may or may not be in line with what God commands about how we deal faithfully with each other. And the last thing, so those kind of things have gone through my mind about how do we carry that out, and that sometimes when we follow God faithfully and follow His commands, it's going to cause us some difficulty in this world. That's just the way it is, and Jesus pointed that out to us. That's what He brings when we choose sides, and when we choose to follow Christ. It can mean struggles for us, but God gives us the strength and the courage by the power of His Spirit to do that. And let's be ready for that. One last little note here before I close. You may think, wow, what a ripoff. Joab gets demoted, and he's the guy who's been faithful to David and giving him good counsel. This Shimei, who curses David, now gets on the ground and begs him when he comes back, and clearly is playing the political game, is able to get back into David's good graces. Be careful. I would point you to 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, and verses 36 to 46. David gets back at him as David gives instructions to Solomon before he takes the throne and says, your first order of business is to kill Shimei because he cursed me. And later on, that is one of the first things that Solomon does. So Shimei gets it in the end. David does remember and does not forget, and when he no longer needs to maintain his throne, he certainly, in quick order, takes care of those who were not faithful and supportive of him. So if you're someone who likes to see things balance out, they do in the end. But nonetheless, let's maintain the faith. Be strong. I pray God would give you that kind of courage and strength to deal with difficult situations, because it can be tough sometimes to do what God calls us to do when we get tied into our emotions and our relationships with those around us. So God's comfort and strength to you this day, and we'll continue reading, and we'll talk to you again soon.